So it's a real pleasure to be with all of you. What an amazing day. And this is a great time, I think, to convene a panel on cryptocurrency, which is one of the largest and most discussed parts of the Web3 world. We're going to start off with brief introductions from our amazing panelists. They all got into crypto in 2015. So if you do the math, we have 21 years of crypto personal and professional experience on the panel. And let me start off with Chris. We'd love to just hear from each of you a little bit about professionally your experience, but also personally your experience. And maybe somebody in the back could just shut the door. Thanks so much. Chris.
Sure. Thanks, everyone, for joining this panel. I'm Chris Storaker. I'm co-founder and CEO of Arch. We are a decentralized finance, asset manager, and investment platform. Basically, what we do is we help people build well-diversified crypto investment portfolios. So about my journey professionally, I've been in fintech for many, many years now, building in, I'd say, like traditional payments, and got into crypto around 2018, building a CeFi platform called Backed. I was helping them launch that product, and I would say fell into the rabbit hole of crypto, particularly the decentralized side of things. And I have been building Arch since early last year, and it's been a fantastic journey. I'm happy to see some familiar faces here as well who have helped us along the way. And with crypto, I think I have like a very strong, like fundamental attachment to the core ideas that are behind decentralization and giving people more control over their assets, their data, and so on. And I got first exposed to crypto in 2015, as you said. It was actually on a panel like this, in a smaller setting. Somebody mentioned how people in Ukraine during the Maidan Square protest were receiving Bitcoin with like QR codes. It's like, okay, I had heard about Bitcoin, never thought it was like interesting. I heard that, and that's when I bought my first crypto. Sadly, it wasn't enough, but yeah, that's how I got started into this space.
Super. Daniel, tell us a little bit more about your crypto journey.
So my name is Daniel Stevens. I'm here representing Bird. We are building AI products on the blockchain. So we're essentially using the blockchain as a training data set to predict behaviors on the blockchain. I got my start in crypto in 2015, as Alison said. Started messing around with Ethereum mining rigs, and that was sort of my entry point. For me, the most fascinating part about crypto is sort of the mechanism design and the incentive structuring that's out there, and how you can use these technologies to get otherwise uncoordinated actors to coordinate. As an economist, sort of by training, that was really fascinating to me, and I definitely drank the Kool-Aid in a big way and haven't really looked back. Started advising, started building bots myself, and then ended up getting in the space full-time, working with Bird about 18 months ago.
Can you say anything about the personal investing experience?
Sure. Personally, I am a terrible trader. I've learned that the hard way. Much better builder than a trader. So one of the things that I think I've taken away from my trading experience is self-awareness. Knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, and for me, one of those weaknesses just happens to be day trading. So I'm more of a long-term holder. And big proponent of Bitcoin and Roth IRAs. If anyone's interested in that, would love to talk about it after.
Fabulous. And just before we get to Natalie, let me just see a show of hands in the audience. How many people have owned or invested in crypto? Wow, this is definitely the right audience for this panel. Anyone who found it hugely successful, even in the current climate? Anyone who wants to raise their hand as built houses or mansions or fortunes off of your crypto money? Okay, smaller group, zero group. All right, Natalie, tell us a little bit about your travels.
Sure. So I've been in crypto since 2015, and at the time I was working at a research center, and we were trying to reignite DigiCash, which I'm sure as many of you know was started in the 90s, and we were trying to be the electronic version of the Australian dollar. We pivoted a few times, and ever since then I've been in the crypto space, and I've been very exposed to the early Ethereum ecosystem. And with that exposure, I actually got very interested in DAOs back in 2016. And right now I'm running a company called Scadi Labs, and we kind of look at emerging ecosystems, and we try to figure out what are some of the core primitives that are missing there that we have to build to onboard DAOs and to operationally enable DAOs. So really kind of, we pride ourselves on being a small team of developers and technologists and to build things fast. And I'm really fascinated with the crypto and the DAO space in particular for a similar reason to what Daniel said. I just think it's really amazing to kind of think about adding incentive structures to online communities and using the blockchain not only to coordinate capital, but also to coordinate humans. So that's what I spent most of my time thinking about.
And Natalie, can we say you've personally invested as well in crypto?
Yeah, absolutely. Much like Daniel, I'm a terrible trader too. Also a better builder, but I've dabbled in the space ever since I got started, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity out there. And more importantly, I think that there's a lot of, if I were to look at investing in the space, there's a lot of very interesting, worthwhile projects that just deserve support. Some of them will take off, some of them don't, but I think generally like allocating capital to like a very, very high growth space can make sense from like a lot of perspectives, especially if your goal is kind of to further the space.
Super. Well, it's wonderful to be here, and I think the first question I would love to hear from each of you is where you think we are in the crypto journey. So at its peak, as you know, crypto reached 3 trillion. It's now hovering around 1 trillion. It goes down momentarily, so you have to check your phones to get that right number. But I think part of what's fascinating is this just part of an early part of the journey? Is it a necessary market correction? And how much is this due to normal market fluctuations versus infrastructure missing or lack of security? So Daniel, maybe we can start from your end. Where do you think we are in the journey?
Sure, and Alison, I think I know why you're choosing me first, because I've got something perhaps a bit unpopular to say. I'm sidestep your question just a bit. Rather than answer my thoughts on where we are, I'm going to sort of offer a grade to myself and to everyone here. I think that, for the most part, I'd sort of give the industry at large a solid C+ when it comes to, our adoption cycle and where we are. And a couple of the facts that lead me to something like that is, if you look back in time, it took about 45 years for electricity to reach 25% sort of penetration. It took about 35 years for the telephone to reach that 25%. It took about 15 years for TV and 7 for the internet. And you hear this story out there a lot about how the internet grew on analog rails, and therefore Web3 should be growing a lot faster since it's growing on digital rails. But if you look at the research out there, there's this really profound irony in my mind, and that's that all of the surveys have sort of coalesced around this single factor that is the chief criticism of blockchain and Web3, and that's trust. Yet we are supposedly a trustless system. So I don't really have much of an answer as to where we are in some broader spectrum, but I do think that for me at least drives a lot of sort of soul searching of like what can we do as builders and how can we make sure that we are accelerating this. If you look back in that time span and you see that we're at sort of 13 years or so after the white papers from Satoshi, and we are not at 25% market penetration.
Super. Chris, I'd love to hear from you, and also you may have some approaches
Sure.
you're working on to the experience of much of our audience and panel in terms of investment challenges.
Yeah, so going back to the question, we're super far from mass adoption by any metric. So I think at the US we're 10% of people who have ever held any crypto, 300 million globally or something like that. So this is not widespread. And what to me feels like the greatest challenge is that if you go inside that metric, active users of crypto for our other use case other than speculating is far less than that. So if you think about fantastic protocols like Uniswap, you have 5 million users. MetaMask was at 10 million users not long ago. So there aren't that many active users, and I think that tells that we haven't crossed that gap towards early, even an early majority or something like that. And it's definitely like early moment, and I think when we look at metrics such as market capitalization, we say, oh, the space is dying, it's gone like from 3 to 1, it's a disaster. But I like to think about more like of digital assets and tokens in particular, like more like early stage tech investments. So it makes sense that they have strong correlations with stuff like interest rates and stuff like that, that we usually don't have such a direct like mark-to-market kind of approach, because there tend to be private investments, like VC investments. As you were saying, like sometimes VCs will like deploy capital and are okay to see some of it die. And this is a very transparent way to see a new technology, a new ecosystem being built. And I think it's very early stage also. You think the ERC20 standard is from 2017, Uniswap really deployed in like 2019, 2020. So we only had like a functional ecosystem and infrastructure to trade among ourselves for 2 years. So it's similar to COVID, kind of like insane to think about. So it's very early.
I somehow hope our trajectory is a little different than COVID, but I take the timetable. Do you want to comment on this question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree, we're super, super early. And while I think most people that I know now have dabbled into buying or selling cryptocurrency a little bit, where it's really at is kind of like, are people actually using these products, right? And Daniel kind of like alluded to a very interesting fact, which is that lots of people aren't using it because they don't trust it. So now in crypto, we have this really cool thing that we talk about, which is like, oh, we're building these trustless protocols, and this is really exciting. But the core of what makes crypto work is that actually we have groups of people that self-select to work together and that trust each other. So what makes crypto work is the trust in the community to then, build trustless protocols together. So I think if we kind of want to like go for, mass adoption, something that we do need is basically have people trust the technology, have the technology be less scary. And that can be, very, very easy things like, or not easy, but like very common sense kind of things like, we need better UX. We need to abstract away a lot more of the technology to make these things usable enough. And we need to maybe like no longer test in production, but actually put out protocols that don't get, like hacked all the time. It just, I just think it doesn't encourages a lot of trust if you hear every other day, like, some major protocol got hacked, people lost a lot of capital. So I'm not sure if that's true, better audit, or like, I don't have the answers, right? This is experimental technology that we're building and exploring. And I think to a degree, like it just has to be the way it is right now because this is the development stage that we're at. But, we're definitely early, and I think that there's still so much that we don't know, right? Like there's still so many use cases to be unlocked. I mean, last year, not to take up too much time, but last year, everyone got very excited about NFTs, right? And sure, we were talking a lot about NFT arts, but I actually think NFTs have massive potential for like, representing ownership, real estate, identity technology. There's a lot of interesting things that you can do with transferable and non-transferable NFTs. We don't know the use cases yet, and I think we can only really start to begin to speak about, okay, we're at mass adoption, or we have the killer use case once all of these technologies and use cases have matured a little more.
Well, this is a perfect transition. Maybe we can come back and hear from Chris and Daniel about use cases, because I think that Esther put a challenge in front of all of us this morning and made clear that it's not enough to have it be fun or entertaining or speculative. It's sort of what is the vision for use cases beyond it. So I think Natalie's given us NFTs, but it'd be great to hear, Chris, you mentioned Ukraine and the 60 million that has gone there, and Daniel, you spoke earlier about Estonia. Maybe we can talk about some use cases beyond speculation, Chris.
Right. So, well, at Arch, as an asset manager, we spend a lot of time looking into what's happening, what assets are being created, how's the distribution of users, number of protocols, assets in terms of like total value locked and so on. And what you can see is that it seems like speculation, of course, is the greater magnet to people, but finance has been one of those like broader sectors that I think we are doing a good job at. We still have plenty of stuff to do. So, for example, under collateralized loans and things of the like. But we're good. We trade people money trustlessly across the globe. We do lending. We have stable coins. Some of them work quite well. So like we have good development of the financial side of things. DeFi is the first killer use case for crypto. I think that there's good evidence of that. When you go to consumer use cases, I think we are still missing on the promise that I think we heard from the 2017 ICO bubble. We were looking at creating real-world experiences out of crypto. I don't think we've seen those materialize yet, but there are some indications of the things that are closest to digital that are already there. So you think audio's trying to become the Spotify, Mirror trying to be the medium for the space. For digital assets, we're getting there, and of course NFTs, entertainment. That was something that no one expected would be such a draw for people into the space. So like doing like the math, it would be something like 50% is in DeFi, 30% is in like this consumer broadly attached to NFTs. And then you have things about like infrastructure, which is super exciting. So decentralized computing, storage, those things are becoming real. They have actual users who pay for it. They can be alternatives to Amazon S3 in some use cases. So that is exciting. I think the on-off chain or like online, offline is what we need to work on in the future. So, yeah.
Super. And Daniel, talk a little bit about Estonia.
So, to be honest, Alison, my knowledge of Estonia's experience in blockchain is rather thin. I think the interesting thing to point out about Estonia versus some of the other jurisdictions that are adopting blockchain is what specifically they're using it for. Obviously, blockchain serves as a form of currency in some cases, but what Estonia is doing is solving problems for everyday people. Most of the Americans in this room lament their taxes, and not just the fact they have to pay, but the fact that it's excruciating. If you're an Estonian, it's point click on a smartphone, a couple of minutes, and you're done. So from a use case perspective, I think the other way to think about that is like problem solution. And so one of the problems that I care deeply about as a data scientist is the democratization of the machine learning pipeline that's on Web 2 and is really responsible for most of the wealth that it's created. And that's sort of core to our vision of what we're trying to solve here. Those concentrations of power and wealth, they're meaningful to Westerners like myself, but they are critical to many other folks around the world. There's studies out there that point to Facebook being able to generate over $200 of value from the data that is being left on those apps. $200 to me is potentially quite trivial. $200 to a Bangladeshi who's facing climate change and facing all of these other challenges is life-changing. And the way I look at this as an economist is that effectively all of us are performing free labor for these Web 2 companies that are harvesting that data for an input to production. I mean, that's all it is. It's an input to production. It's like GM or Ford not paying for plastic or steel in their production process. And so we look at this problem and say that we as users need to take more ownership in that process. And by doing that, we can really solve some more systemic problems than just simply, tech or even statistics. As I said, like this is nothing more than sort of global free labor, and I really believe that it needs to be addressed.
Oh, that's so great. I would love to hear from each of you a little bit about who are the winners today in our more speculative world, and who do you think we could get to be the winners 10 years from now? So, Daniel, you've sort of put the challenge on the table. Will it be people in the developing countries? Will it be users? I think today a lot of people think it's speculators, venture capitalists, the infrastructure. But let's start, Natalie, with you. Who do you think is winning today? Forbes has a list of the crypto winners, and they're not probably in this room, although maybe there are a couple. And then who could be winning 10 years from now?
Yeah, sure. So obviously it all depends on how we measure winning, right? So there's going to be some people that like win the monetary game, but really I think at the end of the day, the users will be winning. So we're building technology that actually improves the lives of lots of people across the world that are currently locked in by geographical borders, by situations that they're born into that potentially would never get any relief without having access to technology that provides them with an alternative to what either their government finance or, their situation gives them. So yeah, sure, there's going to be some VCs that are going to do really well, and I'm excited for those people, but I'm just really excited for the users, and I include myself in that group, right? Like, I benefit from using crypto and DeFi every day, even if I want to do like foreign transactions. And this is like, just a financial use case, right? I was actually very, very excited that both Chris and Daniel talked about the non-financial use cases that are being unlocked, because I think advancements in both privacy technology as well as digital identities will unlock really like the next wave of use cases that will be especially important for people that aren't in maybe the US or Australia or Europe, that aren't in first world countries. So yeah, I mean, the short answer is I think the winners are all of us.
Great. Daniel, what are your thoughts on that one?
She stole my answer. In all seriousness, if we sort of peel the onion a bit deeper, I do believe that ultimately this can represent a real shift in how things are built and created, how value is constructed. In any cycle, building businesses does get incrementally cheaper as the cycle matures. And I think that the starting point for Web3 businesses inherited some of that success of Web2, and so it's starting to get cheaper and cheaper. And so, this idea of somebody being able to come to a group like this with a great idea and the right ambition to accomplish it, and the rest of the building blocks are sort of falling in place or are actually sort of programmatically available because other builders have built these decentralized protocols, that's the future that I hope to see, and I think that's the success that interests me most. And that creates a new layer of winners that's not just sort of users, but people that want to create things that are durable and that can outlast them and can sort of transcend their local environment.
Perfect. And Chris, who do you see as winners today and 10 years from now?
Yeah, well, I agree with both of you. It's the users. I had like a brief message as the local Latino in the panel. Like this summit is called Web3, and it's important to remember that. I think we all face really big challenges in building Web3 applications. Onboarding is super hard. The experience is confusing, complicated, frustrating, it's scary, all of that. And there's always the shortcut of, oh no, let's do it 2.5. 2.5 is the solution. And like, yeah, I lived in a Latin American country. Like the stuff that you guys have here, like Venmo or Netflix, whatever, it takes a long time to get there. And there's a lot of people who never have access to it. So it's important to create something that is truly, permissionless, ideally as decentralized as we can do it, where it makes sense, and that we actually use our capacities to solve those challenges that we have today. It's early, but it's important, it matters.
So I think part of the role of being the moderator is listening to the debate earlier today. Everybody loves the idea of something that benefits users, is frictionless, helps give people access. But what kind of additional protections and guardrails do you think have to be put in place to get that broader adoption so we don't have people going broke in developing countries as well as here? And then as someone who's been tracking this for about the same 7 years you guys have all been in it, I'd love to hear how you think we balance the decentralized concept with the idea of guardrails. So is lack of guardrails part of the promise, or what types of protections have to get put in place? Natalie?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I know this is not the most popular, it's not the full answer, and it's not the most popular thing to be talking about, but I do think when we kind of start to see mass adoption and lots of people using, let's just say, DeFi protocols, I'm very excited about decentralized insurance, actually. So I think that there's a lot of companies that are working on ways to make it not just less scary, right, but to actually ensure you, hey, there's a way for you to not lose your keys, right, or hey, there's a way for you you not to screw up. One of the scary things about DeFi is that essentially, the slogan is kind of don't invest what you cannot lose, and not your keys, not your coins, and lose your keys, too bad. Which, I mean, if you don't know much about technology, I mean, thinking about my mother, right? These aren't very encouraging statements. But if there's a decentralized insurance company that kind of understands these issues and that can design very, very novel and interesting solutions for how you can be insured that you don't lose your assets and you're not victim of some kind of fraud in a way that's like not like a traditional insurance company, I think that could go a really long way. So yeah, I generally think obviously we still need to make improvements in how well we test a lot of these protocols. Generally, like privacy, to make sure that people's data is safe. But yeah, I definitely think like improving the user experience and giving them some reinsurance could go a long way.
Daniel, what are your views? What kind of protections and guardrails?
So if I didn't lose too many friends with my C+ comment, I think I'll lose some here. Regulation. It's the elephant in the room. If I've learned anything from my father, it's that when there's an elephant in the room, you introduce it. So in my mind, it's regulation. And I think one of the parts of that does raise its importance is maybe a bit less obvious, and that's that we've become excellent in this country over the last 100 years at regulating intermediaries. If you look at our regulatory structure, it doesn't actually touch sort of either end. It's all about the intermediary. And so not only is this sort of fundamental problem of like how do you regulate computer code, but it's also an entirely new learning process of how do you regulate without an intermediary. And I think that both emphasizes the importance of having those safeguards in place, but it also raises the bar and to say that this is going to be a very difficult problem to solve if the goal is smart regulation.
And before we turn to Chris, is there any example that you like of that in the world? I presume you're not thinking of DOJ, SEC, some of the traditional regulators. What does that look like in your mind?
I think the fact that there is no analog is what the problem is. As I said, that for the most part, and I'm not a financial security expert, but my understanding is that in almost all cases, our regulators are designed to regulate the intermediary. And so we have to fundamentally learn how do you regulate the other sides of the spectrum. And then it's complicated by the fact that whatever is there is actually just computer code. It's protocols. And then you throw in DAOs and sort of the jurisdictional complications of that. And at the end of the day, sort of my statement is simple. This is going to be a very hard problem to solve, and it's also a mission-critical problem to solve if we don't want to, in America, lose the sort of geo-arbitrage battle of what is ultimately, in my mind, to an extent, a national security imperative, right? At the end of the day, this is about cryptography. And if we in America are not the home to the brightest cryptographers in the world, we will lose on the future battle of war, essentially. So, not to make this dark, but I suppose we already had a COVID analogy, so why not bring up some more here? But
Let me turn to Chris.
No, I completely agree with you here that regulation is a really important topic, and I think we need to contribute to that understanding of what, for example, for regulators to get what a DAO is and what it means, it's going to take some time. Like doing the flip side as well to it, I think crypto and this idea of immutability and perfect transparency can be a tool that can be abused. So same thing about like safeguards and like protections for users. We need to think about privacy in many ways. Not only like people getting doxxed and getting put into a van and ask their private keys, but also thinking about what does it mean for the government to know everything that I do online. How can we protect people in those cases? I think it's important. I'll say the other thing that's fantastic about this space that we shouldn't forget is that self-custody is a really, really like history-changing kind of concept, and you can talk about people having to deal with abuses in countries like Venezuela or other like more complicated places, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that everyone in crypto is a good agent. So we need to work to make this ecosystem comply with the law.
Perfect. I think this is a great way. We have 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask each of you a wrap-up question, and feel free to pull it in any direction you want. But my question is, it's got two pieces to it, like any good wrap-up question, but I would love to know, what are the metrics that you would look at a year from now to say crypto is heading in the right direction? Is it more users, more regulation? And then the other question is, what would you like to see that would really excite you? I mean, Daniel, you're in Miami. I'd love to hear more about that. Chris, you mentioned Ukraine and sort of really using crypto to help. And Natalie, you're working on all kinds of privacy and other safeguards and infrastructure. So I'd love to just hear a wrap-up comment from each of you as to what a year from now you would love to see that would make you think we are on the right track. Natalie.
Yeah, just start. So I'd really love to see just generally more user adoption, right? So I think putting price action aside, seeing more use cases that actually benefit people would be great. And I think one of the things that I'm hoping to see is just generally like better digital identities, or more use cases, or not more use cases, but actual more projects that will get us closer to digital identities and that next wave of use cases. And just to play back to regulation earlier, another thing that I would be very excited to see would be entirely new regulatory bodies evolving, right? So I think the people that are best equipped to solve a problem are the ones closest to it. And it's needless to say that the SEC just isn't close to the problems that we have in DeFi, right? So I think we can already see that there's like a lot of small groups of people self-selecting to work together to speak to regulators or to form their own initiatives to come up with a good set of rules that would help us govern these kind of this ecosystem or these kind of systems in a way that is not too restricting yet protective. So I think that would be super cool too.
Perfect. Chris?
Oh, I love that answer. So the diversity in use cases is the metric that I will be looking after. The analogy is gold rush mining town, in the 1800s, whatever that was. You go there, there's only, men who are miners. And the only use case that's being deployed by that economy is mining. And if you look at that town, how are you going to tell if that town is going to survive the gold rush if you start seeing different people moving in and deploying different use cases and economic activities? So that's the core metric. And I agree. Like, the use case I want to see right now is identity being solved. It has so many interesting implications, and we are not there yet.
Perfect. Daniel? I mean, obviously, the C+ grade has to improve by next year.
I would hope so. I would hope so. But, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So very unlikely in a year's time, and perhaps even, only a couple years' time. But the benchmark for me is sort of, if you imagine Web3 as a Rorschach test, what is the first thing that's thought of? And if those first things are asset markets and investments, I think we've sold ourselves a bit short. I think if the first thing that we see is solutions that affect humans on a global level, that to me is sort of the checkbox. Certainly not a year's time, and time will tell how many years it does take, but that's sort of the high water mark that I'm watching for.
Wow, so exciting. Thank you to our amazing audience, and we'll turn you over to the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you.